So how does thinking beyond binaries offer alternative conceptual approaches?
Well, first of all, it tries to call into question the way we have fixated on these sort of binary approaches. For instance, when we look at crises or we look at conflict and we look at responses, both from people in terms of, for instance, flight, but also from, let's say, countries or organizations in terms of interventions, then we tend to look at those contexts in terms of let's say, exception and normality, or crisis and normality, or inclusion or exclusion. And so this binary thinking sort of glosses over what is in the middle of those, right? I think in most instances, a crisis may be normal for many people that experience it, or may become more normal over time, or may become routine, or is a recurring, let's say, crisis or recurring episode of escalation. So there's much more normality in crisis than we would assume, and vice versa also. So normality may be, like, let's say, sometimes escalate into something that knows a certain level of emergency and back and forth. But the same in an exclusion, to talk about these camps again, like very large, long existing refugee camps are often seen as sites of exclusion, but on the ground, the camp itself is a measure of inclusion, right? With a lot of care and health programs and food and education and so on and so forth. So here we see that people are partly included, while at the same time maybe partly excluded, and they maneuver between those two poles, right? So to denounce the notion of the refugee as somebody who is forced to flee and needs protection wherever a person claims asylum, should not do away with the fact that this person also has choice or strategy, or may employ a certain maneuverability in the way he or she goes about, and vice versa. That the migrant, right, who is deemed to be a free agent in trying to get to another place, may experience a level of force that is maybe not recognized as such. So also here, what is voluntary and not, what is legitimate and illegitimate, what is formal and what is informal, all these binary, let's say, oppositions are called into question when we look into the complexity of that mixed migration issue. And that is, I think, primarily relevant in terms of how not only on a policy level we try to come up with new ideas of accommodating this, let's say, new form of migration. It's not really new, obviously, but it's something that is high on the political agenda today. But also academically, and how should we come up with ideas of how to see and understand this, right?
Yeah.
And so one way of looking at it is to try and accord agency to the migrant, even within trying circumstances. So there may be a lot of force, there may be a lot of crisis circumstances under which somebody, is let's say, seeks a way to get out of the country, seeks a way to get on with life. But in that context, there is always the performance of migration, in a sense. People choose to take a certain path, people choose to go onto a certain boat with a smuggler, people choose to go into Europe and to seek registration in one country and not in another one, right? So this whole regular secondary migration debate. So what is interesting is to go and look beyond those sort of rigid explanation. I see another thing here, right? So refugees, migrants, force and choice, but also the difference between what is an obstacle and what is an opportunity. What for one may be an obstacle may for the other, turn into an opportunity for migration.
Yep.
So there we have the same. So you can apply this, I think, if we apply critical studies to forced migration, or migration studies in a general sense, I think it means to start with being very critical towards the classifications and labels that we ourselves use and tend to critically sort of adopt.